So many people. Yeah, so my name is Bert Spaan, and for the past 2 years I've been working at the New York Public Library on a project called the New York City Space time directory. So it's all about history, about maps. It's about JavaScript too. So tell a little bit about history of New York, about my work at the library, and sometimes here and there there'll be some JavaScript. I'm not American, I'm from the Netherlands. So I moved from Amsterdam to New York City 2 years ago, and I've been living there since. Who in this audience has been to New York City? Quite a few people. So maybe the people that have been there recognize this building. It's the main branch of the New York Public Library. For the ones that haven't been there, this is how it looks. It's made of marble, it looks really old. It's not so very old, it's just 100 years old. But they tried to make it look really very old in Greek. And the facade is made of marble, but if you go inside, I mean, it's actually made of steel, so it's kind of fake, actually. But it's still a beautiful building. If you want to see my slides, you can. There's just a few really large videos and images we advised. This is how the building looked, the library, just after it was built in 1911. So you can see the old cars and the people walking around. It was nice and not so busy on the street as it is today. Before this library was built, this building, this is how it looked. There used to be a big water reservoir, so all the drinking water from the city was where now the library is. So it's right on 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. And you can even see people walking there on top of the reservoir. I don't know what they're doing there. At some point this became too small and they built a bigger one, and then there was space to build a new library, which is where I work. There is actually 3 library systems in New York City. The New York Public Library is the biggest one in 3 boroughs. So it's Manhattan, Staten Island, and the Bronx. And then there's 2 other libraries, one in Queens and one in Brooklyn. My library, there is 92 branches. Most of them, people just go to get books and to take English lessons, and those are just the tiny libraries in the neighborhoods. But we also have 3 big research libraries, so that's where all the historical collections are, where the maps are, where the photo collections are, and where the researchers and historians go to find out information about the history of New York City. And the biggest research library is the one I just showed you. 5th Avenue. So yeah, I already told you that we have lots of maps, lots of photos, lots of historical materials that you can use to find out how the city changed over time. The goal of my project, which is a 2-year project funded by a grant, is to take all those materials and try to turn them into a searchable atlas. So enabling you and everybody else to find out more about the history of New York City through the internet and through open data. So it's making it easier for you to find maps, to find photos, to find how the city changed in the past 200-300 years. So our goal is to take the collection from the library, take all the maps, take all the photos, and use the digitized materials, extract information from those materials, like extracting labels from maps, for example, and turning them into data sets and data visualizations and search APIs and tools. This is where it all starts. We have, I think, 6 of those studios, and we have 7 or 8 photographers working full-time taking high-resolution photos of our materials. So you can see the table, that's where the books are put, and the maps and the photos. And up there is a really high, I think, 82 megapixels camera. And my colleagues work full-time to try to digitize as many of the items in our collection as possible. And there's quite a few. We have millions and millions of items, of course. So this is a never-ending task. You can see the computers there, and they use Photoshop to stitch things together and to do the color correction. So this is where the materials from the stacks from deep inside the library come, and they're being digitized and then put on the internet. With a website called Digital Collections, where you can go and access hundreds of thousands of digitized items in high resolution. Most of them are available in the public domain, so you can download them and use them and do whatever you like with them. You can even sell them if you like. This is a funny example of a building in the shape of an elephant, which used to be a brothel, and then it burned down, and then they rebuilt it, and then they burned down again. And it was in Coney Island somewhere. Maybe you know where that's the beach in New York City. lots of maps, and my project really is about maps. I'll show you a few maps. This is a map of New York City when it was still called New Amsterdam. Those were the good days. And you can see that we're really small, and this tip of Manhattan to the south is this way, and that's the north. And that's the wall, the famous wall of Wall Street. A few houses here and there, a big fort. This was, I think, 1660, so 50 years after the Dutch came and started building a city there, just before the English took it away. This is a very famous and beautiful example of a map showing Brooklyn. This is Brooklyn. There's a bridge here now, and on this map you can see there's a few farmhouses and a few roads, and the great thing about this map is that every farm you can see the name of the farmer there. So if you start looking at those maps in more detail, you can really learn a lot about the history of New York just by looking closely and see what information is available on them. Photos also. This is a beautiful photo taken from the Manhattan Bridge. Many of those buildings are gone now, but a few, I think this church is still there. You can see old cars and people walking around, but very peaceful and quiet. This is a beautiful example of a photo taken from the Brooklyn side of the Brooklyn Bridge just before it was finished. You can see here the tower of the bridge. And this is such an amazing photo. It's taken more than 150 years ago, and if you zoom in, hopefully I can. You can even start reading names of buildings and names of ships, right? So this was a ferry to Philadelphia. And because they use such a long exposure, you can sometimes see even the ships coming in. Let me find the ship that's coming in. Yeah, right, so this is where the ship came and went during the photo that was taken. I think this is Buenos Aires, isn't it? So we don't just have maps and prints and photos of New York City, but also of many other places in the world. So you can go to our digital collections and find out, for example, how Buenos Aires looked a little while ago. This is a very great example of another item in our collection that we have. This is a book listing all the people that had cars in 1918. Of course, you need a really big book today, but in 1918 there were not so many cars, so you could fit them all in a little book. So it lists the name of the car, a locomobile. I've never heard of those, but they existed. And also amount of horsepower. So this is a 48 horsepower locomobile. And we know that the owner, Mr. John Scholl, lived on 156 West 86th Street. So you can really start looking at this address on a map and maybe find out where this guy lived and how his house looked. And we have maps of that area. So this is, I think, West 86th Street. There was a elevated train, which is now a subway. And I think the guy lived somewhere here. This is what the street looked in 1918. Maybe those are locomobiles, I don't know. And this is what it is now, with very big American cars and bigger houses. This actually was the locomobile, and we know what it costs too. It was only $3,500. Which is because we have the locomobile book in our collection, so you can actually go back in time and see what a car cost 100 years ago. They're cute cars, aren't they? So the goal of my project is really to make it easier to tell those stories, to connect maps with photos, with, for example, this book of cars. Another example is a photo of a beer brewery somewhere on the upper east side. You can read the name here of the brewery. And you can also, we have lots of maps, so we can find this brewery here. So this is the building. I think the photo was taken from somewhere here, which is now, of course, also gone. The big apartment building is built. So again, going back in time, connecting maps and photos, and using digital technologies to make it easier for you. That's the goal, and using open data, and I'll show, of course, more open data and more JavaScript later, but first I'll show some more examples of our photos. This is a hardware store on the Lower East Side. You can see, if you zoom in, you can see what they sold, and also if you zoom in, you can even read the name of the hardware store on the window. It says L. Coleman Hardware Stores, 374. And you can start looking for those people that owned that store in what we call CD directories. CD directories are basically phone books without phone numbers, but they list where people lived and what professions they had. So, and we have them from around 1780 to 1925. And the 1790 book is really thin, and there was not so many people in New York City then, but the 1925 is literally this big. And I think in 1926 they decided to stop making those books altogether because they were just not so, didn't make sense to make even bigger books. But anyway, we have them, this is a 1899 one, and you can find the family Coleman and the address, the hardware store on 374 Grand Street. And not just can you find that shop that I just showed you, but you can also find other people in their professions. So this person made uniforms, there was somebody made skirts, there was a glazier. And of course this is a great source of information if you want to find out more about the changing economics of the city, what professions people had, where they worked, how they got to work. And if you combine this maybe with census data, you might even be able to tell what money people made and how the income influenced the city. So we have their address, and so we can start to look for maps, and we can find the map that shows that hardware store, which is on the corner right there, 374, the very street. So I've shown you some maps, I've shown you photos, I've shown you some books. Of course, now our goal is to try to extract information from those items, otherwise it just stays a JPEG or a TIFF file. So we need tools to turn books into text, and to turn maps into geospatial data, and to turn photos into geotagged photos of geotagged maps of New York City. So I think around 8 years ago, we tried for the first time to do crowdsourcing on this project, which is called What's on the Menu. And people went to this website and they helped us transcribe prices and dishes from historical menus. We have a large collection of menus. So the input is just high resolution menu JPEG, and the outcome is a searchable database of prices of dishes in New York City. So this menu tells us that chicken livers costed $2.75. So on this website you can search for chicken livers, and you can find all the restaurants that had chicken liver, and also the prices and how it changed over time. So this was the first experiment that we did with crowdsourcing and turning historical information into searchable historical data sets. And this proved really successful. People came by the thousands and helped us. So before we knew it, all the menus were transcribed, and we went further, started looking for new collections to extract information out of. And of course, maps is one thing that we were always interested in making more accessible. And there's so much information hidden in this map. You can see names of factories, in this case an ice factory, and there's I think a piano factory next door, and maybe another piano factory somewhere here, and a strange circular building. So it would be great, of course, if you would have some search engine where you could type piano factory and you would find this map, you would find where in New York City this map is from. So a little later, after the menus project, we commissioned a tool called MapWarper, which is a crowdsourced tool for georectification of historical maps. And georectification is the process of taking a scanned high-resolution map and twisting it and stretching it so it fits on, in this case, OpenStreetMap. How that works, you put control points that correspond to the same location on the original map and on OpenStreetMap, and then the software rotates and makes sure that it fits. And of course, when the map is not precise, sometimes there's lots of distortion, but usually it works pretty well. Second step is cropping away the material that we don't need, in this case, the legend and the name. So we're just really interested in the cartographic material. So first, you try to position a map on the map of New York City today, then you remove the non-cartographic material, and then in the end, voila, you can overlay this historical map on, in this case, a map of the Bronx. And if you do that for all pages of an atlas, you can stitch them together, and you can, for the first time, see this whole atlas, which used to be a big book with lots of pages, here on top of a map of New York City today. And we've done this for many atlases and many maps, so you can really start going back, layer it through history, and, for example, make animations like this. By the way, if people now or afterwards look at the presentation, all the slides that have this tiny little link thing here, you can click on it and you would go to the website or to the island that we show. So those are all links, most of them. So yeah, let me go back to this. So we have done this process for thousands of maps, and by doing that we've created this database of the locations of all those maps. So we started thinking, or it was before my time, so my colleagues started thinking, what now can we do? And one of my colleagues, Mauricio Giraldo, he made a tool called Building Inspector, which takes those historical maps and it extracts, in this case, names of buildings from those maps. So people transcribe building names. Or, in this case, people transcribe house numbers, and by doing this, creating a data set of the locations of historical house numbers, which of course we can use to cross-reference those listings of people. So we can start building together a big data set which enables us to make a historical atlas of New York City. We've done some projects where we've traced the names of streets and streets from historical atlases. So this is a little video of my colleague manually tracing streets in Manhattan, I think 1854. So now we have data of house numbers, we have data of historical streets, and we can start thinking of what happens if we combine those things. I'll show you a few more other crowdsourcing tools. This is Surveyor, a tool that I've finished, I think, 2 months ago. It's for crowdsourced geotagging photos. So we ask people, can you place this photo on the map of New York City today? So people come and they move the low camera, and they move the target, and they'll help us creating a database of locations of photos. And it works pretty well, and many people help us. And this is a map of all the submissions. And you can click on one, you can see a subway line or an elevator train, which is now gone, by the way. So I think it's time to go to JavaScript a little bit. So how does it work? There's lots of data sets and existing tools that were already there before I came. And I've worked on many modules which read data and convert it to the space-time data model. So I have locations of streets, house numbers, the shapes of maps, and names of buildings, and I am using, in this case, Node.js to read all those data, connect all those APIs, read static data sets, and turn all those data sets into the data that goes to the Space-Time Directory website. So for the first time, there's one place we can go and download all our historical geospatial data. For those tools, so the format of the data set, it's all empty JSON, which all those data sets are static files, and you can just download them from our website. You don't have to connect to any APIs. This is the website. Data sets in an open source GIS program. So you can see streets and house numbers and buildings. So you can already start imagining that we have lots of information available about historical New York. So with all those data, I've been, for many of the data processing tools I've made, I'm using Highland, which is a example. I can just read one of those data sets, maybe combine them to other data and output them again to new line delimited JSON. I've also created some command line tools. So in this case, I'm just downloading all the shapes of the maps from Amazon S3, and I'm filtering only maps that mention Broadway somewhere in their name, and then converting them to GeoJSON, which then turns out to be this map. And there's a Broadway in New York, in Manhattan, but there's also one in Queens and one in Brooklyn. I think even one on Staten Island. So those are all the outlines of all the maps containing Broadway. So it's really easy to just download those JSON files and process them from the command line, from JavaScript. Now that all this data is available, I thought, what can I do with all those maps, and how can I use this data set containing all those maps and use that to make it easier for people to explore maps of New York City. So this is a little script I wrote to take all those maps and start grouping them by decade, which in the end yields a visualization like this. So this shows all the maps that we have grouped per decade. So you can see that we have lots of maps of between 1910 and 1919, and a little less that are older. And when I did tools like this in the past, maybe 5 years ago, I always needed PostGIS or complicated geospatial databases. But now, with a library like Turf, it's very easy to do the geospatial processing just in JavaScript. And I can make visualizations like this just by using Node.js. Which in the end allowed me to make this tool, which is a tool for really easily exploring the history of New York City in the maps. So this is called Maps for a Decade, and it shows all those maps that I just created in the data set. You can just hover your mouse over one of those areas, and you can see all the maps that we have available for that area. And the tool that I showed you for crowdsourced geotagging of photos allows you to, if you have all those locations, start comparing them with Google Street View. So above you see a beautiful collection of photos taken on Fifth Avenue. And because we know the location of those photos, we can start comparing them with how New York City looks today. So above is 1911, and this is 2015. So this shows you what you can do if you have data about the collections available as open data, and you start combining them and making new tools. In this case, a tool to explore the photo collections. So I've already shown you that we have the location of historical house numbers, and we have the names of all the historical streets. If we start combining them, we create a data set of historical addresses, right? Because a house number is just one number, and a street is just a street name. But if we start combining those things, we get historical addresses. And if we have historical addresses, we can start cross-referencing them with the people living in New York City 150 years ago. So again, I'm using Turf, this JavaScript geospatial library, to, for every house number, find the closest street, and then combining those two data sets to a new data set of historical addresses. And this is a small a geocoder for historical addresses. You can type in a street name and address, and you can find the very address there. And this street is now gone. It used to be a tiny street in Brooklyn, and now there's, I think, highways and big housing projects there. To do this, by the way, I'm using another JavaScript library, which I really like. It's a full text library for JavaScript. So things that I used, for example, Elasticsearch in the past for, I can just now do in the browser with things like this. So I've already shown you a few examples from the city directories, where they list the people and their professions. We've started using OCR software to extract information from those city directories. It works pretty well, it's pretty accurate. And then we are using some other, in this case I'm trying to, for example, you see that the city directory that I show in the back has some strange indentations. So using another JavaScript library that I really like, it's called Arbush. It's for geospatial indexing. I'm able to find the closest line, which is in this direction. So I'm able to connect those things together and really turn this OCR data into a searchable text. We need to do some post-processing. Those addresses usually are abbreviated, so we need to turn, for example, 5th into 5th Avenue, and FB and Avenue B, and then we normalize those addresses, allowing us to start linking data sets together. This is something we are now able to do. So this is a map of New York City. You can click on a little house from 1854. You can see who lived there and what professions they had. And you can see that so we can do this for the whole city of New York, for Manhattan and for Brooklyn, because we've combined those historical addresses and those city directory data. So we can really turn this into an atlas of New York City. I think we'll go to the last slide. So this is a tool I'm currently working on, which combines all those data sets and allow you to search, for example, in this case, people named Nathaniel, and you can find all the Nathaniels in New York City in 1850. You can zoom in, you can see what their professions were. In this case, this Nathaniel was let me see what he was. A grocer, so I'm sure he sold groceries and maybe he had a little shop. We know the address that he lived in, so we can also start looking for building data that we might have of his shop that he had. So we have the outlines of all those buildings. You can see that there's a bridge now. There didn't used to be a bridge, and there was houses there. We have historical address data. Most of those addresses are gone now, so you can't use Google Maps to find those addresses, but we have data going back 200 years. And not just addresses and people, but also, in this case, we have documents, mortgage data, so we know how much people paid for their house 150 years ago. Photos, of course, so we know how those streets looked. You can maybe even find that house of that Nathaniel that we just found. And of course, at last, the maps that I already showed you. So. With this tool, you combine all those data sets. So you combine maps and photos and addresses and those listings of people, and you can really makes it easier to go deep in time and use our collections and see those maps and see those photos. So all of the code and that I've been working on, and also all my colleagues are working on, is open source and available on GitHub. Some of the libraries are very I think only useful for people that work at the library, but many of the things are also useful for other people. And I think I don't have any more time, right? Or do I? Maybe I can show you just one thing. So it's not just about JavaScript. I also have a meetup series, which is not too interesting for you because you don't live in New York City. But this has been a great way to build a community around the project, and to get people in the library and talk about historical maps and historical data. And sometimes we even leave the library, and this was a beautiful night somewhere, I think in April, where we went outside and we used historical maps. So this guy is holding maps. And this is a friend of mine, Jeremy, and he knows so much about his neighborhood, so we used historical maps, and he told stories about that neighborhood using the maps from our library. And where in the past it was pretty difficult to find those maps, now with the tools that I've been working on, it's pretty easy just to find the maps you're interested in, or photos even. So making a walking tour like we did here was much easier, because we now had easy access to geospatial data, and we could actually find maps and photos that were useful for this tour. And that's it. And yeah, that was it.